Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming today. We are going to start like in at 7:05, just in 2 minutes. We're waiting for more people joining today. We have a huge amount of people who have requested tickets for today, and we'd like to thank you all for coming and for showing solidarity and support for Palestine. We'll just wait for 2 minutes before we start with our event and our speakers. Okay, I think we're going to start our event just now. Thank you, everyone, for joining us here today in solidarity with the Palestinian uprising and the general strike. My name is Mohammed Al Azraq. I am a Palestinian refugee from Al Qabo village, a village based in southwest Jerusalem. It was destroyed by the Zionist militias in 1948. My family were forced to leave the village and they became refugees in Aida refugee camp where I was born and grew up. Scotland has shown its support for Palestine. Thousands of people marched the streets on Sunday. And thank you all for coming today to stand against settler colonialism, apartheid, and military occupation by being here. I also want to thank everyone behind the scenes who have been working non-stop for the last 18 hours to make this event a great success. We have also wonderful speakers from Gaza, Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and Haifa. And thanks to our speakers for their time and generosity in joining us under such circumstances at the moment. What's happening in Palestine, it's nothing new. It's been happening for the last 73 years and even before this. Not only Palestinians resist in many ways against violent settler colonialism and apartheid, but we're also fighting for the right to be heard, to tell our stories in our own words. This is why today's event is so important, and the hundreds of you being here is so important to raising Palestinian voices and stories, and for also supporting the struggle for liberation from the Jordanian River to the Mediterranean Sea, from Ras al Naqura to Umm al Rashrash, as Palestine always been and will always be. Thank you so much, and I will pass over to Amira, who will be introducing our speakers and start our events. Thank you.
Thanks, Mohammed. Our first speaker of the night is Lubna Shomali, who is based in Bethlehem, and she is the Advocacy Manager of BADIL, which is a resource centre for Palestinian residency and refugee rights. Lubna is going to introduce us to the foundations of the Palestinian cause and settler colonialism. Thank you very much for coming, Lubna.
Thank you, Amira, and thank you, Mohammed, and thank you, Scotland, for the wonderful show of solidarity. And it's been very impressive, and we've been feeling it. So we really appreciate that. BADIL Resource Center for Palestinian Residency and Refugee Rights is a human rights organization based in Bethlehem. It was created in 1998 at the request of the refugee and at the request of the refugee community. And IDPs, or internally displaced persons, inside 1948 Palestine, as well as refugees in exile. BADIL was created with the sole purpose of promoting and defending the rights of Palestinian refugees and internally displaced persons. That our main focus or specialty is the ongoing displacement of the Palestinian people. So we've looked at both historic and contemporary displacement, and the policies and practices of the Zionist movement before the creation of Israel and the Israeli government after its creation, and how they perpetuate the conflict, or how what we call they perpetuate the ongoing Nakba. The ongoing Nakba is a term that BADIL has coined, and it refers to the ongoing displacement of the Palestinian people from their historic lands in mandatory Palestine, which includes what is now called Israel, or what we like to call 1948 Palestine, and the territory occupied in 1967. Israel uses a variety of means and practices in order to accomplish this, but there are two main pillars to the Zionist Israeli regime. One is the ongoing displacement and dispossession of the Palestinian people from their lands and homes, and the other is the ongoing denial of return. Sadly, these two pillars of the Israeli regime serve one major goal, and that is controlling the maximum amount of land in Palestine with the minimum number of Palestinians on that land. And in order to achieve this goal, the Zionist movement began as early as the British Mandate from 1917 to 1947, which led to the displacement of 150,000 Palestinians in various ways, and most of them becoming denationalized. Then during the Nakba of 1948, another 750,000 Palestinians became displaced or became refugees outside of what came to be called Israel or 1948 Palestine, while another 40 to 60,000 became displaced internally inside 1948 Palestine. Then when Israel occupied the rest of Palestine in 1967, another 500,000 Palestinians were displaced, some of them for a second time. So Israel has used a variety of policies and practices in order to create this displacement, this ethnic cleansing of Palestine. And while the waves of displacement have varied over the years, where we saw large waves of Palestinians being displaced and dispossessed, particularly, for example, in 1948, or what Palestinians call the Nakba, this displacement has been ongoing, coupled with the denial of return. When we talk about how Israel displaces Palestinians, or how Israel has created the Palestinian refugee and IDP, or internally displaced persons population, they use forcible transfer or forced displacement. And this is a term that is used within international law. And it's this creation of force that creates a situation in which people are either violently physically removed from their places of origin or places of residence, or there's a creation of a coercive environment, a situation that is so unbearable that an individual really has no choice but to leave his place of origin or habitual residence. By using both of these types of force, Israel has been able to create a significant Palestinian refugee and IDP population. As a matter of fact, according to BADIL's numbers, we estimate that there is 9.1 million Palestinians who are either refugees or IDPs. This constitutes the largest and most protracted refugee population in the world. And they have been able to do this through these policies and practices in which they physically, violently remove Palestinians from their places of origin or habitual residence, or they create this coercive environment. So if we take the situation in Sheikh Jarrah today, for example, or in any area in which there is a Palestinian community or village or town, there are forces in play, policies and practices and laws put in place by the Israeli regime, either through its domestic legislation, when we talk about 1948 Palestine, or through the military orders that it has created, which are very comparable to this domestic legislation that applies to Palestinians no matter where they reside in mandatory Palestine, and causes this force or this creation of a coercive environment, which leads to these growing numbers of Palestinian refugees and IDPs. Once Palestinians are displaced, of course, there are laws and practices put in place to deny them their return. Now, when we talk about displaced persons, whether they are refugees, those who are displaced outside an entity, or those who are displaced within the entity, who are internally displaced persons, they have two basic rights. One is the right to live in dignity during the period of their displacement, in which there needs to be the provision of those basic needs and rights in order for them to be able to live in dignity. Things like housing, access to water, access to land, access to natural resources, adequate livelihoods, the right to life, the right to freedom of speech, the right to worship, etc., etc. So all these things need to be provided in order for a refugee or an internally displaced person to be able to live in dignity. The other right that displaced persons, refugees, and IDPs also have is the right of return. So a refugee or IDP status can only be resolved by the exercise of their right of return. And so Israel has also put a number of policies and practices in place to deny this right of return. And one example, which is very similar to what we're seeing in Sheikh Jarrah today, is home demolitions. So, for example, in 1948, after Palestinian villages were depopulated, bulldozers came in and destroyed those villages. This is because they wanted to ensure that Palestinians would struggle to return or to deny return in an indirect way. Another policy or practice that was put in place by Israel in order to deny Palestinian return is the Israeli law of return, which says that only if you are considered Jewish by the state of Israel or the Israeli regime can you exercise return. And so, of course, this creates a situation in which the non-Jewish population of Palestine, Palestinian refugees and IDPs, those were displaced by the very regime that is preventing their return from returning, excluding them from being able to exercise that right. So this combination of forced displacement and transfer and the denial of return also contributes to this growing situation or the growing numbers of Palestinian refugees and IDPs. The policies and practices that Israel puts in place, of course, are colonial in nature. And they are also apartheid in nature, or they are apartheid practices. For example, the law of return states that only those who are considered Jewish can exercise return, whereas those who are not Jewish cannot exercise return. So we have a situation in which Israel has created a superior group, namely Israeli Jews, who can exercise all rights and privileges according to Israeli law, and an inferior group, Palestinians, who are not able to exercise their rights according to Israeli law. So Israel has created this colonial apartheid regime in order to continue the domination and oppression of the Palestinian people. And these policies and practices have carried throughout the years. So, for example, the law of return that was put in place in 1950, very shortly after Israel created itself, and continues to this day. So Israel is able to manipulate the demographic composition of Palestine, creating forcibly creating this demographic composition to favor Israeli Jews over the indigenous Palestinian population. So when we talk about the situation within international law standards, and we talk about the crimes that Israel has created, or the crimes that Israel has perpetrated against the Palestinian people, we are talking about forced displacement and transfer, which is considered a crime under international law, to displace or ethnically cleanse the indigenous Palestinian population outside of Palestine's mandatory borders. We are also talking about the colonization of Palestine through the law of return and other policies and practices in which they create a settler colonial population on the same area. We are also talking about de facto and de jure annexation of Palestinian land. changing the demographic composition. And this, of course, all culminates in the denial of not only Palestinian return, but the denial of Palestinian self-determination. And of course, apartheid. So the numerous crimes that Israel has created require a certain response from the international community. And when I say international community, I'm talking about the UN, third-party states, for example, the US, the European Union, non-European Union states, et cetera, in order to rectify the situation that has been created in Palestine. What we suffer from today is the lack of political will from the international community to bring Israel into compliance with international law. And so we see the intensification of these policies over time. And so we see 3 wars on Gaza, for example. We see the blockade on Gaza. We see the creation of the apartheid wall. We see continued annexation of Palestinian land. We see continued forced displacement and transfer. And we see the continued demolitions of home and forced evictions like we're seeing in Sheikh Jarrah today. So as Muhammad said from the very beginning, this is nothing new. Israeli crimes against the Palestinian people are nothing new, and the lack of response from the international community is nothing new. So if there is nothing to hold Israel accountable, how can we change this situation? And so I think this is where I will leave off. I think I took up my 15 minutes of time, but if there's an opportunity to answer questions at the end, I'd be more than happy to do so. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lubna. Unfortunately, we don't have a question and answer facility today, as we had about 500 people sign up to the event. So we decided it might be a little bit difficult to manage that, but that was a really informative talk. And thank you very much for your contribution.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Next up, we have Eman Basher, who is a Palestinian woman from Gaza. She'll be speaking to us about the situation in Gaza at the moment. And then she'll be followed on by Malaka Shwaikh, who will talk about her experiences too.
Hello, everybody. My name is Eman. I am a mother from Gaza and a school teacher. I don't know what to say because I haven't slept in 3 days. It's a little bit tiring here and terrifying, usually in the night. Because usually the explosions and the bombardments start during the night. So it's really, we're just sitting here helpless, not knowing if we are going to make it or not. I am the one who tweeted about my sons, and I wrote about them that I have put them in my bedroom so that if we die together. And the next morning, I woke up to find out that Rashida Tlaib has read my tweet on her speech in House 4. When the tweet went viral, I felt a little bit happy and confused at the beginning, because I felt like there are thousands of Palestinian and Gazan mothers with their situations worse than mine, and they need this chance that comes once in a blue moon, and they need their voices to be amplified. When I tweeted, this was one of the way that Gazan people use to deal with such poor events. First way is either that they put, because nobody here is safe. From the beginning of this aggression, they were targeting civilians, they were targeting towers, they were residential towers, they were targeting houses with their residents inside, they were targeting children. 200 Palestinians were killed from the beginning of this aggression, including 60 children and 34 women. 3 of them were pregnant. So I don't want to say that this is a daily life of the Gazan families, but usually there are 2 ways to deal with war events. One way is that either they put the whole family members in one room so that if they die together. And another way is that either they put individual members in different kind of rooms so that if they bomb the house, at least one member or two would survive. It's really heartbreaking. I don't know what to say, but I wrote a tweet like I think I was sending somebody today that this is the 4th or the 5th day of the aggression, but my husband was next to me and he told me this is the 9th day, and I was shocked because we lost counting, or we don't know what day we are in because we're hiding in our houses. I have two boys, by the way. One is 4 and the other is 2. They cannot go out. They have been hiding in the house. Eid al-Fitr has passed, and they didn't celebrate it the way like children or Muslim people do. They didn't go out, and usually, like one of my boys, my eldest one, Faisal, has a toy gun, and first day of Eid, he cried hysterically because I forbid him from going out, and he didn't understand that a toy gun is going to be like a source of terror if he went out. Like if he went out, he could be targeted. To tell you the truth, when the 4th day after the tweet came and we are in the same situation, nothing happened. I even have read that the US President Joe Biden had approved a more than 700 million weapons sale to Israel. I felt like all of our words were going in vain. Like we were screaming, but nobody's hearing. As if we were saying, like some of us is getting killed here, but he was saying, like, don't worry, there are weapons for all of you. Don't say some. What actually made me feel better is that a lot of psychologists and a lot of therapists have been contacting me and have been checking up on my children. My eldest son has been developing trauma in a difficult way. He's been having nausea, diarrhea. He has been barely sleeping, barely eating. But the other one is too. He has been developing trauma in a different way. He doesn't want anyone to touch him, anyone to hug him. Any attempt of us to try to reach him would be difficult. Some doctors from Iraq, I think, has been sending me videos how to deal with my children, and I think they are, like, I can say they are 50% better now. But you know, to end or to deal with a children's trauma, you need the cause of the trauma to end first. And I feel like sometimes I really feel like I really want to talk about the power of words, but I feel like I'm living a lie sometimes, and I really appreciate all of the messages and all of the people standing with us and praying for us and protesting and doing all what they can to support us. But we don't only need condemnation. We need Israel to be held accountable for all of the war crimes they have been committing. Like yesterday, we had in the news they were threatening to bomb 2 schools that more than 300 families were sheltering in. I mean, they displaced people from their original lands in 1948, and then they attacked and terrified them in their refugee camps in Gaza and in the West Camp and in the whole of Palestine. And then when they bombed their house and they ended up in the street, and they went to they went to schools to shelter them in, because they thought they are safe. So now they are threatening to bomb the 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 whole school. This is nonsense, and like this is not living in dignity. This is not a decent life. And to tell you the truth, this is like the third uh, or the fourth aggression on Gaza, and but it is the first for my children, and I'm really terrified for them, and I'm sure that every Gazan mother is feeling the same or even worse, because some of them has lost their children, and some of them they are even having their children now, as we're speaking, under the rubble, unable to know if they are alive or dead. Um, um, I really like I take every chance I have to speak. I take every chance to be interviewed, to write an article, to speak about this and to expose these war criminals. And I'm really glad for this opportunity you have given me. I don't think I have anything more to say. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Eman. We hear everything that you're saying. There's nothing really to say after that, but Malaka, if you'd like to kind of report back on your experiences being a Palestinian from Gaza.
Thank you, Eman. And yeah, I really don't know what to say, but thank you so much for being with us today. I'm sure I speak for everyone here that we hear you, and I hope that this shift in narrative is going to translate into shift of actions very soon to stop such aggressions. And I want to start by saying I'm really grateful to see so many of you in this conversation. And thank you for being with us, and thanks to Eman for such a powerful speech. I want to also start with a note that my sister, so I have been away from Gaza for just over 7 years now. I left in 2013, and since then I've not been able to go back. So my sister Fatma, she sent me a message the other day, I think it was on Sunday night, and she said that the Israeli attacks are very heavy. We can't handle any more attacks. It's too much to handle. And I remember waking up to my cousin's message, who was sharing also similar fears. He can't believe he is still alive. And this is the kind of message that I have been seeing in Twitter, shared by so many other Palestinians in Gaza. And the night before, even my sister screamed in her WhatsApp message, and she said that this is unprecedented. It has never been normal, and it will never be normal. It's day 9 of the Israeli aggression today, and I'm not here to speak about what's going on in Gaza. I think Palestinians have been risking their lives to tell us what's going on, to kind of shoot everything and document everything live on Al Jazeera and other news outlets there. But I'm here to put things in context and ask you to not only stand united as you do today and to show solidarity, but also to take further actions to get us closer to achieve justice and liberation in Palestine. And the events in Gaza are not 9 days old. Gaza has been under Israeli siege since June 2007. The very basic rights of being able to travel to see family, just as an example, is denied to us. If you are 13 in Gaza, you've been through 4 wars, the 2009, 2012, 2014, and now 2021. And we all need to remember that Israel is allowed to do this. It's enabled to continue with its violent settler colonial project day and night throughout Palestine, from north to south, from east to west, and it's not facing any impunity. And like Eman said very brilliantly earlier, we saw the other day how Biden approved this, kind of like more than $700 million weapons sale to Israel. So I'm here to speak to you as individuals about what you can do today. What we want is political actions. Protests are important. Those kind of solidarity events are really important for awareness, but they're not enough. We've been trying them for years now. We've been having more than this during the 2014 aggression on Gaza. We need you to work on lobbying. Lobbying is very important. We need political pressures on our governments. We need to pressure our government officials to hold Israel accountable. We need our governments and institutions to stop arming Israeli apartheid. We need you to boycott Israeli products. We need to boycott brands that support Israeli apartheid. We need to boycott companies that are complicit in human rights violations in Palestine. This is not the time to feel helpless. It's the time to act. It's the time to call things for what they really are. And I do believe in the power of collectives. We've seen that very clearly in the context of South Africa, how the power of collective ended apartheid there. So we need to get our institutions, every institutions that we work with, we need to make sure that they stop investing in Israeli apartheid in any way that they do. We need accountability. We need sanctions. We need to center Palestinian voices. It's time, like Eman said again very brilliantly, that we need to listen. We need to respect the language that we use, the tactics that we adopt. And this is very important. We're not voiceless. There are structures that deliberately ignore our voices, that marginalize them, that sometimes exclude them. And I'm glad again that there is a shift in narrative, and we need to make sure that this shift continues and it translates into actions. So governments, academia, policymakers, as examples, have for long been sidelining Palestinian narratives. It's time to center those narratives in our work. We all have a moral responsibility to listen, to respect, to amplify, to center those Palestinian voices and those Palestinian narratives. And as I said earlier, it's time that we call things for what they are. There are no both sides in the struggle for justice and freedom in Palestine. This is not a conflict. This is a settler colonial project that has been eliminating us for decades. Let's call it for what it is. And I want to end with a note. And I think, yes, there is a lot of complicity in the world that we live in, especially coming from the global north, especially coming from our governments. An Israeli settler colonial project is enabled by their support. But we can't change this. We can't change this reality by centering justice in our conversation and in our discussion. Justice needs to come first. There will never be peace in the whole of Palestine without justice. And let's make sure that this is not a one-off solidarity event. Let's make sure that solidarity actions continue. Let's make sure that the conversation about Palestine is alive until justice prevails. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Malaka. I think the message that we're trying to spread around Scotland for sure, and we will hopefully follow those words consistently. Next up, we have Wassim Ghantous, who is from Haifa in historic Palestine. Wassim is a postdoctoral researcher in political geography at the University of Tampere in Finland. And he's going to speak to us about the strike happening today, as well as the struggle of Palestinians living in historic Palestine.
Thanks. Thanks, Amira, and thanks everybody else. Thanks, Mohammed, for organizing this event. It's a very important event. And actually, I will continue with a hopeful tone. And we are witnessing today, sorry. We are witnessing today a massive movement of Palestinians, but also is echoing globally. There is a shift. There is a shift in discourses. There's a shift in action. Coming from, I'm not from Haifa originally. I was born and raised in Haifa. I have my share in Haifa. However, I come from a destroyed village closer to Lebanon. So we are I'm one descendant of the IDPs that Lubna spoke of before that. And And I mean, normally when we speak about Palestinian citizens of Israel, or 48 Palestinians, as we prefer to say, we don't speak about the colonial citizenship. I mean, it's a citizenship that is basically, it's filled with contradictions. On the one hand, we remained here, and Israel tried in all sorts of ways during a military rule that it imposes on us since 48 until 67, until 66, to make Palestinians, to coerce them to go out. It imposed a military rule. People couldn't go to their lands. And then Israel basically confiscated all of our lands. What remains now, where Palestinians live inside 48 Palestine, is basically 2% of the land. And those 2% never grew up. Since 48 until today, Israel built more than 1,000 settlements, none were for Palestinians. So this is just to emphasize what Lubna was speaking. So we're speaking about a demographic engineering process, and it's also a territorial one. And Palestinian citizens of Israel, of course, they went through these different shifts. So until 66, it was a military rule. And, you know, our parents were terrified. My grandfather used to be kidnapped each Christmas, before Christmas and before Easter, just in order to show to my family and to him that he can't say that I am from a destroyed village, that he won't say that he's Palestinian, to submit to Israeli domination, and to accept that he will be alienated in his own country. And then during this period, Israel orchestrated through a variety of laws how to steal Palestinian land, the absent presentees law, basically, which means that you cannot go to your land, and therefore, if you don't use your land for a certain period of time, then you lose your land. And basically, what happened inside 48 Palestine became a laboratory to what happened in 67, and which we are still witnessing today, and more so in the West Bank. Of course, Gaza had a different juncture since 2007. So this kind of continuous colonization and expansion has put Palestinians in 48 into all sorts of situations. So we find Palestinian neighborhoods inside like cities such as Haifa. They call it mixed cities. It was never mixed. It was Palestinian cities that were emptied from their land, from its population. And then Palestinians who live around it basically moved in and became the new people of Haifa. However, still those people of Haifa are now creating a new identity of Haifa. And today we are seeing it. And of course, this is in connection with the original owners of Haifa, who are now mostly in Lebanon, in the refugee camps. And actually, it was also interesting to see that the strike that happened today between the river and the sea was also echoed in the refugee camps in Lebanon. And those people of Haifa there, and we are having also a strike here. So when we speak about Palestinian citizens of Israel, it's normally a forgotten issue because we don't have a military occupation per se. However, this shift that I'm speaking, one is hopeful and one is a very terrifying one, to be honest. So the hopeful one is the organization, and I will continue to speak a bit more about, but to go to the terrifying one, just to give a perspective about that. So, of course, Palestinian citizens of Israel have constantly tried to maintain their Palestinian identity. It's a very pluralist society. We have all sorts of Palestinians. We have Bedouins, we have farmers, we have people who live in the city, we have all sorts of religions and so on. And Israel basically tried to fragment us. They don't treat us as Palestinians, they treat us as Muslim, Christian, and Druze, or sometimes they just say minorities. And the daily discrimination, it's not only by the state itself and by its legal system that Palestinians, of course, some try to vote to the parliament and mostly to object from there. However, I don't, and many of the people that are running today the movement here in Haifa and elsewhere, all over 48 Palestine, they don't. However, still, I'm not condemning this. I mean, it could be a strategy, and those people at the end of the day are with us. They are people that are trying in different means to achieve. I wouldn't say liberation, I would say equal rights, but still. So, I mean, you have Palestinian IDPs that are constantly trying to do activities in their own destroyed villages. They can reach them, but they can't live in them. Some are making settings there for years, like the village of Ikret, and my village, it's called Kufr Baraim. We have been making sit-ins we did it for 2 years, and then we broke. The people of Ikhlat are still ongoing until today, and many others are doing all sorts of activities. So it's but on the everyday basis, the institutional racism, which comes in housing, in education, in all sectors of life, now is also echoed with an intensifying racism that is coming from below, from settlers. I don't know how many of you happen to see what has been done, what has been going on in the recent days. But I mean, of course, not to say that this is only in 48 Palestine. I mean, this basically, when we see settlers, armed settlers with all sorts of hybrid security actors, with the police and the soldiers, all operating and orchestrating violence and coercion and shooting at people. I mean, of course, it is more intense in the West Bank, and particularly in rural areas of the West Bank. However, today we see that these kind of neo-fascist movement is going inside 48 Palestine. And 48 Palestine, the strength of 48 Palestine, and we've seen it today, is that, of course, with all these discriminatory laws, with all these treating us, dehumanizing us, treating us as minorities, or accepting us only as good Arabs, those are that subjugated, those to orientalize on and so on, and to eat hummus at their places and so on. So what we are witnessing today basically is that the frontier in which Israel is trying to expand is intensifying also inwards. And we also have to say that in Jerusalem, such coming together of settlers and security apparatus, whether it's intelligence or soldiers, police officers, and so on, has been also ongoing for years and intensifying during the Ramadan, in the last few years, and particularly during this Ramadan. And basically what Israel wants to do is to tell Palestinians that Palestine and those who remained here, basically in Jerusalem or in 48, that this is not your space. And you cannot own this place, you cannot enjoy this place, you cannot live in this place, you cannot celebrate in this place. And this boiling up situation has reached its peak with them entering into Al-Aqsa and bombing and killing and injuring many people and arresting many people. So in 48, what happened basically was that Palestinians rose up, as they always do, but this time it was different. People who rose up were not following any political party. It was more decentralized movement. And we see decentralization all over from inside the mixed, or so-called mixed cities like Haifa, but also in all Palestinian towns and villages, and even in the Naqab. And this uprising have included many people, and many from the young generation. And of course, Israel's response was pure terror, and they started bombings, throwing grenades, and so on. And this only intensified when also Palestinians started rioting and so on. Of course, some areas, the most impoverished, where also we had some high level of criminality. Also, now we see that criminality is something that is being done by Israel. If you keep pushing those people, if you don't give them, if you discriminate day and night and so on, there will be criminality. And now this criminality also was projected on Israel and on its police forces. So it's for the first time we see popular clashes all over 48 Palestine. And today's was a strike. And this strike also is a historical moment. I'm not sure if we had such a strike since 1936, maybe, when we had for 6 months as Palestinians before the creation of the Zionist state. We had a massive strike for 6 months against Zionist takeover, and of course against England's collaboration with the Zionist movement, and basically paving the way for colonizing Palestine. And of course, it's only one day, and there's a lot to be done. But also the way this day has been treated from many places that I've heard about, but also from witnessing what was going on in Haifa, is that it wasn't a passive strike that we normally do. You just stay at home or don't go to school, but it was an active strike. So many people striked. We can't really know as for now how many, but it's massive. And we feel the power of the strike because the Israeli media was speaking about it all day, basically. And they're even bringing now all sorts of like lefty Israeli journalists or lefty Arabs in order to speak about it. Because basically, Palestinians, we have the medical sector is thousands of people. We have a transportation sector, all sorts of services, construction workers, and so on. And so this was a lesson for us today to keep on thinking how to move on with the strike tactic. But also the active strike was basically that each city and each village and each community and each neighborhood, they gathered and they did activities. They did activities about what to do when you get arrested as an activist. We had activities of speaking stories for kids, to speak with the social workers, how to deal with our kids during this period. And so on and so forth. We have a media crew that also is organizing all sorts of posters and graffiti. And so we feel that this time is different. And this time Palestine basically has overcame its the colonial fragmentary policies of Israel. Of course, there are distinctions, and we shouldn't say there are no distinctions. Of course, situation in Gaza is much worse today. It's also different, but it's much worse than what we're having here. But before that, I forgot to speak about the militias, what's going on here. So basically, many militias have been, they call themselves civilian armies. Some it's Haifa, it's a well-known settler fascist group. There are multiple of those. And of course, they have their representatives now in the Knesset, the Israeli parliament. And basically, we see that the police and those settler movements, they operate together, and then they will walk them into Palestinian neighborhood and unleash them. We see those settlers even putting marks next to Palestinian houses in order to come back later on and burn them. So, and to be honest, the first time it happened that massively, we weren't ready for it. So it was terrifying, and they even entered into people's homes, beating them up. And trying to basically, they have the weapon, they have stakes, they have batons, they have everything, and the police is with them. And sometimes the police go with them to. And also we've witnessing, but this shift is not only that Israel is basically unleashing its neo-fascist civilians, it's also that the police is becoming like this. People that are getting arrested are being beaten up. I mean, of course, and the legal system. It's also very complicit in this. So we see basically a whole coming together of the whole settler colonial apparatus into a neo-fascist movement that is terrifying. And of course, even a halt of the criminality that is happening today and the massacres in Gaza, in the West Bank, and in 48, even if it halts, these forces are still here. They will be just slowed down. So for the next time, we should also mobilize better and work better, and organize together with Palestinians all over historic Palestine, and of course with our allies abroad. However, last comment, if I may, Amira, do I still have 1 more minute? I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, I'm not sure about the term solidarity abroad, because basically what we are witnessing today in Israel, it's basically a worst case scenario of capitalism, of course, and it comes with all the racialization and so on. And we are seeing similar tendencies in Europe and elsewhere around the world. So I don't think that we are still speaking about solidarity with Palestine. I think we're witnessing a global phenomena of neo-fascism that is on the rise, and Palestine is the most accelerated place where we see these things, and that's why also liberation of Palestine could have global repercussions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Wassim. That was a very thought-provoking summary of what's going on over there, and we really appreciate your input and your opinions on what we should call it as it is and what we should do following that. Next up, we have Akram Salhab, who is a Palestinian activist based in Jerusalem. He will speak to us about the ethnic cleansing in Jerusalem and the situation in Sheikh Jarrah specifically.
Hi, everyone. And yeah, congratulations for getting this event pulled together, Muhammad, and everyone else who made it happen. I've been back in Jerusalem only for 2 months now, but I'm going to speak about, as someone who was born and brought up here for much of my life, and for someone who's been back at this incredible moment in our city's history, because for people who've been following events in Jerusalem, this is not the only uprising in recent years, but this is perhaps the most significant of many that have happened over the past few years. So I think there's, when we start talking about Palestine and the history of what's been happening to our country at large, we kind of find a lot of the themes that Lubna and others have been talking about ethnic cleansing, about settler colonialism, about the dynamics of taking land and removing people from that land. And in Jerusalem, that's been something that's been unfolding over the past few years in all of the same ways that it has been across Palestine, but with a particular focus on the city, given its importance to the Israeli state. So I'm going to try and focus a bit more on recent events, and I can come back to some, or then I can maybe come back to put that in slightly more into the context of the city. I think what we've witnessed in Jerusalem is a series of extraordinary victories on the part of Palestinian youth there, who've been out in the streets and who've won virtually every single confrontation they've had with the Israeli authorities over the past few years. And really, this comes off the back of an Israeli policy, not just of ethnic cleansing, of removing people, of taking over houses in Sheikh Jarrah, across the city and other areas, of implanting settlers deep in the heart of Palestinian communities, armed bases with large flags and armed settlers and police surrounding them. But also, there's been an attempt to dismantle and destroy any ability that Palestinians have to confront that. So, and this is a part of this process of depoliticizing Palestinians and fragmenting them from one another. And the most extraordinary thing about what's happened and over the past period of time is that the uprising that's taken place recognizes all of these, all Palestinian communities as being part of the Palestinian whole, and understanding that, you know, the reason 48 moved was in solidarity within Jerusalem, but also because many of the identical circumstances exist in 48. That if we don't move as one people, then each individual sector of the Palestinian people will be fragmented. And it was very clear to everyone when the bombing began in Gaza that was a crucial moment that everyone had to ramp up and accelerate and keep going in all the demonstrations and the popular uprising and everywhere else in Palestine, because we leave any sector of the Palestinian people alone, it gives Israel just the freedom to continue brutality and its barbarism. So the unity of our people is not just this principle, it doesn't just come from the shared cause that we experience, but it comes from an acknowledgement in this very moment we have to stand together. Otherwise, we can't muster the strength. We can't confront Israel on enough fronts in order to weaken it, so we can at least reduce the brutality that it's going to unleash on people. So it's really about this unity represents something quite important for us, especially given that Israel has been working for 73 years for us not to be unified. You know, Wassim was talking about, you know, different religions, 48, Jerusalem, West Bank, Gaza, exile, different rights allocated to different groups, Druze integrated into the state, others sort of integrated, others rejected. You know, this whole thing isn't, we can talk about all the different impacts of it, but the political impact of it is to fragment us from one another. And it's all, and every time we can come together, you know, that's part of what's been incredible about these Zoom calls is we can see each other where, you know, we didn't used to be able to run events like this on a regular basis, but we can come together and we can unify across borders and move as one people. And all that's happened is that this principle, which is the core principle of Palestinian mobilizing and organizing, has been given a rebirth now. And so, to be honest, from the sense I get from people, the discussions I've been having, going out in Jerusalem and seeing what's happening, it's impossible to believe that this is not going to be something that will continue. This is a significant uprising and it has all the hallmarks of a serious and significant shift in where people are at. And we're hoping that the work can continue in the coming weeks and the coming months until we achieve liberation. And what happened in Jerusalem really was, you know, being described as the spark for this. But I think it's important to understand what the Israeli operation was in Jerusalem. It was to take Palestinian homes. It was to take Palestinian lands. It was to expel Palestinians from them. but it was also to reduce Palestinians in the city to this kind of denationalized non-entity of a people who had no cultural, social, or political rights and had no cultural or social or political expression. And the problem arises for them every year in Ramadan, because if you come to Jerusalem during Ramadan, there's no doubt that this is a Palestinian city. Because everywhere you look, there are lights, everywhere, Ramadan lights, everywhere you walk in the evening, there are Palestinians everywhere. There is, all the shops are open late. Thousands of people are milling around, coming and going after iftar and after prayers to Al-Aqsa. And there's no mistaking that this is a Palestinian city. And this year also coincided with Orthodox Easter. So there were thousands of Palestinian Christians going to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and they were attacked and prevented from going in, and many of them beaten by the Israeli police. And during the celebrations, Palm Sunday and other celebrations, there's thousands of Palestinian Christians in the streets, and scouts and drums and the bagpipes. And, you know, we've got a Scottish audience today, so you'll be happy to know that there's been one fruitful cultural exchange between us. But the bagpipes, you know, it really resonates through the city streets. And you know that this place is somewhere which is multicultural, multi-faith, pluralistic. And when we talk about what's happening in Palestine, it's a confrontation of this beautiful vision of a city which is open for everyone, where people can live freely, where rights can be respected, in a liberated Palestine, with this really dark, ugly understanding of sovereignty, which is based on racial supremacy and exclusion. And these two are constantly coming to a head, and we keep having confrontations in order to determine which one of these visions will win out. And what Israel was trying to do, and the Israeli authorities were trying to do in this latest round of things, is diminish the Palestinian visible presence in the city even further. So I mentioned the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and what happened to people there, but their decision that really began things here actually began at Damascus Gate, when they said that they were going to put barriers on the steps of Damascus Gate, which is the main Palestinian entry into the city, to the old city, and where people normally sit after iftar and after Taraweeh prayers, and, you know, they sit with the shisha pipes or hang out there. And this is something that the Israelis can't tolerate, because, again, you walk down there and there's thousands of Palestinians, and this is obviously our city. And this has been a point of confrontation, and Israel built these 3 watchtowers filled with soldiers there. And this year they thought they could ramp it further. But they hadn't reckoned with the fact that Palestinian youth were not going to accept that. And there were days and days and days of confrontation. Palestinians throwing rocks, throwing bottles, shooting fireworks at them, the Israelis beating them, horse charges, the skunk spray van spraying everyone, arrests, rubber bullets, days and days of confrontation that the Palestinian youth would not let up. And everywhere you went in Jerusalem, and you went to a street corner, or you're wandering through Damascus Gate, you found Palestinians stood around in large numbers, ready to be organized and ready to protect their public space, and ready to assert that this is our city, and it's not somewhere we're just going to let you slowly push us out from. And after 10 days of those confrontations, then the focus moved to just down the road in Sheikh Jarrah, where one of Israel's many colonization projects across the city was taking place, with the planned eviction of 28 families, or not eviction, ethnic expulsion of 28 Palestinian families in that neighborhood were due to take place. And the court case had been ongoing for many decades and was due to come to its conclusion. But then the attention of the city's youth turned to Sheikh Jarrah. And then, as well as the international reaction and Sheikh Jarrah hashtag and all the international support, it was led by Palestinians on the ground. And many of you have seen Mun al-Kurd and Muhammad. But, you know, lots of young people went down there. And again, those confrontations were a key part of the reason why they felt they needed to delay the results of the court case. And then the focus shifted to Al-Aqsa Mosque, where Israeli police and border police and invaded the mosque compound, attacking people again, throwing sound grenades, shooting at people, beating, and were confronted by Palestinian youth who were defending this holy place on the holiest night of the year in Laylat al-Qadr. And this continued, and, you know, what the Israelis were trying to build towards was the Jerusalem Day. And the Jerusalem Day is when far-right Israeli settler groups, and Wassim was talking about the armed settlers that have been unleashed inside Palestinian communities inside 48. When these gangs of settler youth walk through the old city in huge numbers, shouting death to the Arabs, spraying death to the Arabs on shops, and finding anyone they can get their hands on, including the press in many years gone by, who they beat up and give a severe beating to. And if you're Palestinian, you know to get inside and shut the gates that way. And there's no more visible expression of Israel's, I wouldn't say lurch towards fascism, but visible representation of its fascist nature than tens of thousands of fanatical youth marching around Jerusalem, finding anyone they can get their hands on to beat up. And you know if you're Palestinian, my parents have a shop in the old city, you know if you're Palestinian, you shut up shop that day and you make sure you put down the metal blinds and you don't turn out. But this year, because they were not able to force their way into Al-Aqsa, and they knew, having just had a hiding basically down at Damascus Gate, they couldn't take them down to Damascus Gate. They decided they were going to have to keep them up by Jaffa Gate, so they wouldn't have to try and clear Damascus Gate of the Palestinians. In every one of these examples I'm giving you, Palestinian youth won and the Israeli state lost against the most unbelievable odds. And what got us here was this extraordinary spirit. And when you walk around, lots of people have been sending me messages saying, "Are you okay? And the family okay? And what's happening?" And but unless you're here, you can't see what that means. Muhammad lived here for a long time. Wassim's here. Many of you have lived here, so you know the Palestinian spirit. But when you see it catch fire in this way, and you see people just fearless out in front of people, standing their ground, constantly coming back. Whether they near Sheikh Jarrah, and a settler came and shot a man in the head, not too far from where the families are being evicted. And we just happened to be passing by and we waited there. Within about 10 minutes, there were 100 Palestinians there. They turned up in vans, people had alerted them in WhatsApp groups and then come to protect their family. So what's come out of this is this extraordinary spirit, not just of confrontation, based on confrontation, but self-organization. How do we come together? How do we create structures that can, first of all, defend ourselves, and how can we build on that so we can pose a serious challenge to the state? And what happened in 48, when 48 carried the call, and now for this strike that's happened everywhere, this historic strike that's happened everywhere today, we're really facing an extraordinary moment, and there's a lot of challenges ahead. The Israeli police are extremely brutal. There have been 700 arrests inside 48, and many dozen here in Jerusalem, on top of the many that we see usually. I was just down in Sheikh Jarrah early, and they were shooting endlessly people, and there were so many rubber bullet wounds, but people won't give up. And part of that reason is because there's nowhere left to go. They put people's back up against the wall. When you have armed gangs of settlers roaming around trying to find anyone to shoot or kill, there's no kind of accommodating yourself with this system. It has to be one that we have to confront head on, and that's where we're going to. We're going towards a serious confrontation, and one that Palestinians have the ability to win if we're able to stay organized, if we're able to continue this. And we're not in a situation in our history where we have all these political structures that we used to have, for better or worse. We're very fragmented in many different ways. But what's happened just shows you how that can be overturned really quickly. Like, how do we turn these committees into something more substantial? How do we build together to unite and maintain this momentum? What do we need to do in order to solidify that and give that structure and, keep this struggle going? Because it's been given energy by the youth, and it's that spirit that will carry it forward. And I think, the message that I know others have already given on this talk, but I really need to re-emphasize, is that when we're confronted with the Israeli state, the mechanisms and means and the weapons and the technology they have at their disposal is not just shared by Israel to other countries in the world, but it's often given to Israel as a gift from, as we've just seen with America. The means of control, economically, their trade with all the countries in Europe, and many countries in the world, particularly those in the global north, sustains it and allows it to continue this. So we really need to move, I think, as others have already said, from declarations of support, declarations of solidarity, declarations of love for Palestine and its incredible people who are still in the middle of this uprising, towards concrete actions that we can really start to put the pressure on. Because we're talking really about two things. We're talking about, one, solidarity as a principle, but we mean also solidarity as in something that the Israeli state actually measures. You know, when they will stop bombing in Gaza is partly determined by what happens. They're going to continue bombing until they realize that it's not in their interest anymore. So it's a moment where you can really sense what solidarity means, because it's very urgent, it's very tangible, and it's something that we have to accelerate as quickly as we can. And we've seen workers in 2014 in Oakland refuse to unload Israeli weapons. We've seen workers in Italy refuse to unload Israeli goods. These are the kinds of things that we need to do now. We have to find ways, and you know, Scotland, I'm sure, has many unions and workers who are involved in any number of things related to Israeli state practices. What can we do immediately to take action now that will have a serious impact that we can build on for the future? So I think that's the thing that each of us needs to think about, because we go to a demonstration at the end of it, everyone I think feels dissatisfied because they know there's more that they need to do. And wherever you are, whatever your workplace is, wherever you live, whatever institutions you're governed by or associated with or around, there's something you can build and do. And we have to do that as quickly as we can. But here in Palestine, I can say that, you know, it's been a really difficult few weeks for everyone, but everyone's head is held up very high. We look forward to continuing the struggle with you all as well. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Akram. That was a really empowering account of what's happening in Jerusalem and across Palestine. You'll notice that Eman Basher has logged off. She unfortunately had to leave, but we'd like to extend our thanks to her for contributing to this talk, despite the very real and fatal challenges that she's facing at the moment. I'm going to pass on to Suki, who is a trade unionist here in Scotland. And after Suki speaks, Mohammed will be closing the event today by addressing you all one more time. But at the moment, thank you very much to all our panelists for coming along and contributing and giving their perspectives on what's happening in their areas.
Thanks, Amira. Folks, I'm just going to be very short because I think the speakers have outlined incredibly powerfully and also clearly exactly what we need to do. The speakers are right. It's not just words of condemnation that's needed here in terms of what's going on, but really it's about holding Israel to account. It's not just about solidarity, as the last speaker and many have said before. It's about what concrete action can we actually take in Scotland and in other parts, because I recognise that there's people joining us from all over today, but really what can we do to maximise that solidarity and take concrete action, which is going to make that real difference. So I'm just going to outline a couple of points that we're encouraging people, a couple of actions that we're encouraging people to get involved in, but I know that after the meeting we're also planning on sending out more information around different actions that you could potentially take and links, useful links that people should check post-meeting as well. Just firstly, I suppose it's a question around and the action that we can take around BDS. So as we know, Israel violates more UN conventions than and more international laws than any other country across the world, but for some reason it remains sanction-proof. And really, as other speakers have said, our solidarity on the streets is important, and the huge turnouts across the globe really over the weekend are crucial and they're paramount. But so is our immediate task to build that movement of solidarity, build that movement for boycott, divestment and sanctions. So really what we need to be doing is really concrete things around identifying actions that we can take where we live. What companies do we have on our doorstep that have links to Israel, that play their role in the oppression of Palestinians? We need to highlight their complicity, we need to target them with direct action, and we also need to break those links. And I think crucially on the day that Palestinians have taken part in huge-scale general strikes, it's really important to mention the role of trade unions. I'm a trade union activist, and really for anyone on the call today who's not a member of a trade union, I would encourage you to join a trade union. I think that if you're a member of a trade union, you have a huge responsibility to act, and we're asking people to please raise motions through their branches, raise motions around solidarity with the Palestinians, but most crucially, raise motions which are about action. So, we know that there's nothing more powerful than the collective strength of workers. And, we need to be more like those workers in Italy and Livorno who refused to load arms shipments destined for Israel and stated very clearly that they wanted no part in the massacre of Palestinian people. We know that major superpowers across the globe provide weapons, as others have said, lots of different resources and support to Israel. And really, a coordinated global workers' movement has the power to strike, as we know, the biggest blow to global capitalism and Israeli terror. So we need to do all we can to really be pushing our unions to act through motions. Like I say, solidarity, as I say, but crucially, it's about the action that we can encourage our union movements and our institutions to take. Thirdly, we are encouraging everyone to write to their elected politicians and representatives. I know sometimes it feels as if politicians don't hear us, but politicians ultimately are accountable to the people. So really, we want you to express your anger at Israel's bombing and ethnic cleansing. We want to get your entire family writing to politicians, ensure that everyone's taking part in that action, state your solidarity with Palestine and push them for their commitment to act. And I think in Scotland particularly, we often say that Scotland's very good in terms of showing solidarity with the Palestinians. The Scottish Government came out with statements in support of the Palestinians as well, but we need to push the Scottish Government to go much, much further in terms of expressing their support for the campaign for boycott and divestments, and for them to push the UK government on sanctions as well, because statements aren't enough, as everyone has said. They could do more and they should do more, but that's going to take a movement from below. So we need to ensure that we're doing that and applying as much pressure as we can. Basic things like hosting meetings and teach-ins, also incredibly important, informing people about what's actually happening to the Palestinians. We've seen huge attacks on the Palestine Solidarity Movement in recent years. Therefore, we've got a task to educate people. We know the mass media aren't going to be on our side. So please host meetings. If you're looking for speakers, we can arrange speakers, do your teach-ins, show people what's going on in Palestine and ensure that we're doing all we can to give people information and, like I say, spread the word and take part in as many actions as possible. Joint actions in solidarity with Palestine will take place across Scotland. We can share those actions over email after the meeting. We're encouraging people to take part in local actions as well. We appreciate that people are a bit apprehensive about maybe some of the national actions because of COVID, but we are encouraging people to take as many local actions as possible as well. Even visibility, as simple as signs as well, sends a strong message that you stand in solidarity with people. It builds solidarity amongst working class people, ordinary people, and we need to do a lot of that collective work in our communities, in our localities, but also on a kind of nationwide basis as well. Some of the things that we're outlining here are some of the very basics that each and every one of us should and could be doing. And I think one of the speakers quite rightly said towards the end that this isn't just about solidarity. Really, it's about striking a blow to global capitalism. We know it feeds the racism, we know it feeds the ethnic cleansing, and we know it feeds this system of oppression, which allows Israel to continue its terror. So please do what you can. Like I say, we will share more information. And the speakers have really clearly outlined some of the other actions that you should be taking part in. But please don't come to this meeting and not act after it. We can't just go and mobilise on the demonstrations and not organise and mobilise and really take part in concrete actions that's going to move things further forward. So please do what you can. And with that, I'll hand back to Mohammed, I think.
Thank you so much, Suki, and so thanks so much for all the speakers today and everyone attended. I just want to highlight one main point of having the 4 speakers and 5 speakers with us today, not because just different geographical, political things that have been happening on the ground of Jerusalem in 1948, in Gaza and West Bank. It's just because the occupation worked over years and years to divide us into those pieces, into those categories. We have different IDs, color, we have different things. We can't even meet and each other. We wanted to point to highlight in this event that Palestine is all one, with the people of 48, the people in Gaza, and the people in Jerusalem, and the people of West Bank. We are the people of Palestine. We are as old as the olive trees. We are as old as the stones and the mountains of Palestine, and we will not be uprooted. This is something that I think the occupation has failed over the 73 years, and the British colonization before that, and that colonization that Palestine lived under before and before and before, that these people have a strong, rich history, and they're very, very, very rooted in this land. And for this, the Palestinian people will continue struggle and will continue struggle to the freedom and justice for Palestine. Thank you all for today, and thanks so much. And will be really another actions that we will organize for the next few days. And please show your solidarity and support, and take the point that the speaker have raised today. Thank you so much.